Peace to everyone. It's been a while, it seems. I've actually made multiple takes of multiple topics while driving down the street. And unfortunately, the videos just haven't turned out quite the way I want because it's easier when I'm sitting down in a still fashion without a bunch of sound pollution and able to actually formulate my thoughts and to convey them. So, anyways, there's a few thoughts that have been going in my head. I'm going to go over one topic here. One is and it's going to lead into the next topic, which is actually the catalyst for about 3 different takes of videos I've done already. So, for the same topic. So, anyways, so first off, there is this idea that we sometimes we idealize our ancestors to such a degree that we actually think that they were all this wonderful, perfectly innocent, noble people, and that's always been the case. They never did anything wrong. It was always the enemy that did wrong, and it was always the enemy and telling bad stories about us to make us look bad, and yada yada yada. And then the unfortunate reality is that's just not always true. I mean, when Apocalypto came out, Mel Gibson got crap from some professor in Mexico for misrepresenting the basically the bloodthirsty nature of the Mayans and Aztecs. Unfortunately, that professor is wrong. Okay, they were doing a lot of horrible stuff. If I'm not mistaken, there's some codices that were either made by the Aztecs or were acquired by them from the Teotihuacanos who were doing ritual cannibalism. I remember seeing artwork. And it's not Spanish artwork, it's Mesoamerican art showing such. And I think that it was Montezuma that was trying to get into that type of stuff. Okay, so when Cortez conquered the Aztec Empire, he did so with the help of a number of different native groups because they didn't like having their people kidnapped and themselves becoming enslaved to these, to their Aztec overlords. Right now, it's totally popular if you're Mexican to say that you're part Aztec and part Spanish, or part Spanish and part Aztec. Whatever. It happens a lot, and there's this. And it's like, oh, they made these really great buildings and all this cool stuff, and it's like, yeah, you can go to a powwow or some powwow related thing and see some guys dressed up in Aztec clothing doing, beating the drums and doing all this really energetic dancing, and you can look at the guy wearing the fancy costume saying, oh, he's a medicine man, right? And you could think this guy is like some good guy. He has some special native wisdom and all that stuff. It's all BS. I'm sorry. Maybe he personally has some wisdom he's gained in his life. Whether or not that goes back to his Aztec ancestry is the question. Because if you look at things, you can say, oh, well, Cortez just made up all this stuff. Oh, no, he didn't make it all up. He didn't. I'm not trying to take the side of all the colonial sources, but the colonial sources are not always incorrect, okay? And statistically, they can't be, okay? Here's a good example. Sometime in the 17 or 1800s, you have this Celtic revival movement where people are getting into Celtic history and trying to understand these ancient noble Celts and all this. And look, I've got Celtic blood too, guys. I mean, a lot of my white blood is actually Irish, some Scottish, British, some Welsh. Okay, I mean, I've got that blood as well. Okay, so and I'm gonna crap on them for a second and say, yeah, okay, so maybe these revivalists were saying, oh, well, all the things that Julius Caesar said about human sacrifice being done by the Britons, that was all just his way of dehumanizing the conquered to justify his actions to the Romans. Do you think the Romans gave a crap about how the British felt? How these barbarians would, no, they didn't care. Make the world Roman. You think they gave a crap about, whether or not he was dehumanizing them inaccurately or accurately? They didn't care. And here's the thing, turns out when they discovered the bogmen in a British bog, they found signs of obvious ritual strangulation and sacrifice. These swords bent in half. Obviously, there's some ritualistic nature to that. You see that repeatedly. And it's like, okay, so you're telling me that you're now going to tell me that Julius Caesar was dehumanizing the conquered and lying, using propaganda? There's so much weird random information that he has, like one town, for example, where all the guys had the same wife. I mean, you find these particles that exist in historical records, and you're like, that's kind of random. That's a bit too random to be necessarily a fable, especially when it's supposed to take place in that day and age, not something that happened hundreds or even 1,000 years prior, like the Trojan War. Okay. You got to be honest about these things for a second. Okay. Yeah, there are people that write propaganda, and there are people that like to dehumanize the conquered, but the conquered are not always the good guys either. Okay, I know that Russell Means, late of the Lakota Nation, the Republic of Lakota, okay, because he helped found the Republic of Lakota, right? He had a lot of really great things to say. I respect him and a lot of his work, but he was great as Chingachgook in Last of the Mohicans. Holy crap. When he fought Magua, that was a powerful fight. Okay, I love that. But I remember him reading this poem about how before the white man showed up, the natives were all this wonderful, angelic people. There was no stealing. There's no violence. All this crap. And I mean, he was crying. He was crying. And I'm going, I know this is wrong. I know that he is wrong. His information is not complete. Yes, maybe when, Columbus first showed up in the Caribbean, maybe those Indians were actually that angelic and nice, okay? That particular group might have actually fit that bill. Once you get to the mainland, it's a whole different story, because we were conquering and killing each other for however long, enslaving each other, all that was a thing. So we can sit there and pretend that, no, we were always the good guys. It was always the white man that was bad. It was always that. No. Sometimes we were the bad guy. Okay? It's not very popular. Some people are going to say, oh, you're just an apple. You're red on the outside, white in the middle, blah, 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 blah. Don't be an idiot. Okay? I'm sorry. To all those people that think that way, don't be stupid. Educate yourself. Listen to the things that I'm telling you and actually look this stuff up. Okay, I'm trying to pull out facts here that you can actually fact check me on. Okay, and then you can see if I'm actually full of crap or or if I'm right. Okay, and here's the thing: it's not about me being right so much as about the facts being what they are. It's about the truth. And I may be wrong about some things at times, and I'm happy to correct myself when I am. Okay, because I want to use facts and truth to actually correct myself as well as help others along the way. So they say don't meet your heroes. We can imagine all of our ancestors were these great, wonderful people, and maybe our immediate family, maybe our own direct ancestors might have actually been really great people for the most part, maybe, but some of their people weren't. Okay, I mean, look, you can say Geronimo's your hero. Geronimo was a bloodthirsty butcher. Do you guys realize what a bloodthirsty butcher he was? I understand that the Mexicans killed his mother, his first wife, and his first batch of kids, and I'd be pissed off too for life. But the amount of butchery he did in return throughout his entire life against Mexicans and against whites who didn't actually kill his family, by the way, some 16-year-old girl that was butchered pretty horribly by his band. I mean, I'm not gonna describe what happened, but you look at stuff like that, and I'm like, yeah, there's no justification for that type of butchery. There just isn't. There's a popular myth that, the French taught natives how to take scalps. I'm going to say that's probably not true. I'm saying, look, I'm not a trained historian. I don't know everything out there in the world, but I'm going to say this much. According to the traditions, I mentioned to you guys before the legend, the national legend of the Chattahoochee people, right? And you'll see stuff contained therein, and also from existing living traditions that, at least going far back as the 1970s, what's his name? Reverend James Wesley of Kialaji was saying that others took scalps, but our people, the Kialaji people, actually took heads. That Kialaji the town should be Igalaji, and it means separating the head from the body. If you look at some of the old stories, was it Casita, Coweta, Tucabachi, and Arbika? These four grandmother towns. Arbika took the least of the scalps. They basically fought each other to see who was going to be the main town of what would become the Creek Confederacy, and Arbika got the least of the scalps. Okay. this is traditional stories and accounts. I mean, some of it, yeah, some of it's documented by white men, but some of it also got passed on in the oral tradition. And so either we just acquired this oral tradition from incorrect colonial propaganda and we just started believing it and passing it on as our own tradition, or maybe we actually were doing all this stuff. Because let's be honest, there's some pretty horrible stories in what were the British colonies when it came to some of the native, attacks on these settlements. Now, look, I'm not saying that there wasn't justified anger for a lot of the encroachment that occurred and land theft and things that would occur, but there's some pretty inhumane stuff that was going on that natives were doing to whites. And that's just the reality, apparently. Now, you can say, oh, you're believing all the colonial sources. Oh, yeah, sometimes when you keep hearing the same stories in different times and places regarding the same people, after a while, it's like, okay, so what is the truth? What's the lie? Do we only believe the stories that make us look good and we disbelieve everything that makes us look bad and say, oh, no, that's colonial sources. That's colonialism. When do we take accountability for anything that we do or recognize that our ancestors were not always perfect? Okay, we got to be honest about these sort of things, man. I'm not saying that I'm not trying to demonize our ancestors. I'm not. But I'm going to call a spade a spade. I don't care who it is. I don't care whose ancestors it is, if it's mine, if it's yours, if it's all of ours. Okay, like I'm going to call a spade a spade. Okay, I mentioned Fort Mims. That's my tribe who did that. Okay, so don't think if any of you are not Creek and you're watching this and you're from like the Apache people and you're like, oh, that's just wrong to do that. Well, get over yourself. I'm not just attacking you, I'm attacking me. If you feel attacked, I'm attacking me as well. And all my family in the process. Okay? All right. That's a shortened rant on a topic I meant to cover before. So, I'm going to be a little softer this time. I'm going to kind of calm down and kind of relax a little bit. But there was recently a conversation that happened online on one of these Eastern Creek Facebook groups. I'm not going to say the name of the group, which has actually changed to that name and other tribes. It happened because of a conversation that I had with them. Okay. So somebody, first off, I'm going to say that there's a lot of people who've developed this idea in their head about their ancestors, as I kind of mentioned earlier, right? But not so much in the sense of we're all innocent, as so much as what do we believe in? Okay. Like there's this idea that all natives use the term Great Spirit. That's not necessarily accurate though. Okay. Like, Ofanga or Ibofanga is the name of God in the Muskogee language used at the ceremonial grounds. And, it means one above all. That's what the name actually translates as. It doesn't translate to the Great Spirit, although some people have tried to translate it that way. It's not necessarily the correct direct translation. You've had, Creeks speaking in English mentioning the Great Spirit, but the thing is, it's kind of rare. That's maybe until recent times, I don't know, because you have a lot of people who are disconnected multi-generationally from our culture and who don't remember, they don't have a direct experience of, as far as what our traditional culture actually is or what it's supposed to be. So, and some of that I'm going to put in a group category, take all the Eastern Creeks and say that they are all missing a part of the culture in a way that the Oklahoma Creeks in the West have not lost it, or actually most of us have. But it still exists among the traditional, like the ceremonial grounds and things like that. You've got the language intact. It's just that the number of fluent speakers is really, really low, and we're trying to rebuild the language. You got those like Ted Isham, who's a very important guy to know. He worked for the Cultural Archive in Okmulgee. I've talked to him in person. Like he's somebody I would consider an authority, but he does not consider himself. If you listen to videos of him discussing Creek culture and language, he does not consider himself fluent. I mean, look, I've been speaking English my entire life, but there's still words that I never use. There's words I have never used, but I've read in books. There's words that I've maybe used a couple times in my life and kind of forget how to even say them sometimes, just because I never say them, right? I mean, I can read it and say, oh yeah, blah, 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 that word. But it's like, there's going to be a lot of words that we just don't use and they fall out of use. Language evolves over time. There's words in Old English and Elizabethan and King James English that I understand better than a lot of modern people, okay? Because I've read the scriptures. But and I go to Renaissance fairs, okay? Well, I haven't gone in some years, but I used to go all the time. So I've been in environments and have had experiences where this antiquated version of the language was used, but there's words that are not so antiquated, that are still antiquated by today's standards, that I just don't use. And there's some that are academic. There's academic terms and lawyer speak, if you will, that I never use, and that most of us will never use in our lives unless we become lawyers. Okay, does that make us not fluent? I would say we're still fluent in the English language. It's the language that we use. So we use it every day. And we're able to have conversations with any given person pretty much. So that, at least by my metric, would make us fluent. I would say Ted Isham is probably fluent. I'd say Edwin Marshall, who's an extremely, extremely knowledgeable guy, he's fluent. Okay. But look, there's even things that, I remember him posting online at one point on Facebook that he didn't know a certain, no. I think it was in person. I was at one of the bow shoots and he was there and there's like, he said something, oh yeah, They told me this. I didn't even realize that my entire life. I think it had to do with like eating the food before at the green corn before the elders do it. Like the kids aren't supposed to eat it yet. I think that's what was going on. I remember reading about that, and I'm like, oh yeah, I knew that, right? I technically did. I just learned it through a book instead of through my family. So there's going to be times where you have to learn through books. And then by learning things in books, you end up realizing things that people who actually have grew up around the culture don't actually know or don't remember. Like maybe he learned it as a kid but forgot about it. I don't know. But he's I'm not taking a crack at Edwin by any means. He's a nice guy and very helpful and very knowledgeable and very much trying to preserve our culture. So I have the highest respect for Edwin. Okay, Mado, Edwin, if you're watching, which you're probably not. But if you ever watch my channel, Mado for everything you do. So here's the thing. So you have in Oklahoma, I would say the old tribal towns. Okay, so for one, the old ceremonial fires from what is now Alabama and Georgia literally moved. And they're carried in pots, okay? And then they were fed along the way, and then the ashes were dumped in what is now Oklahoma in different various locations. And that became the new location of these sacred ceremonial grounds. That became literally where the tribal towns themselves got transferred to. Even though the old sites are still sacred, like Hickory Ground, tell that to the leadership of the Porch Band, right? But the rank and file people, most of them pretty much know, and I think a lot of them understand that, what their leadership did is wrong, but they still kind of benefit from it. So, so I wish they would do more and kick these leaders out. So, but anyways, I may not be super current on their politics at the moment, but regardless. So yeah, you've got these, you got the transferring of these towns. And now I guess a couple towns did stay behind, and you did have a bunch of random people that kind of hid in the hills and the woods and whatnot. And eventually just kind of built up new communities. But a lot of these groups, while they maintain their identity as being Creek, they don't really have all the same stuff that the Oklahoma Creeks, have. And that many of our young people are kind of just not being involved in, unfortunately. And it sucks. So, our culture shrinking. And I realize that some of the people in the Eastern bands have been learning from us Oklahoma Creeks, apparently, learning about the traditional ways and the language, and they stopped dancing powwow style dances as much as they're now starting to actually do traditional stomp dancing with traditional stomp dance song. Okay, at least some of the Eastern Creeks are doing that. So what does all this go back to? I had a discussion, as I mentioned, on that one group. It was actually a topic brought up because a woman posted, a nice girl, posted basically a screenshot of some email that apparently, I guess, one of their elders out there kind of, sent, and it was information that, was helpful genealogically to an extent, but it also had incorrect historical data. Like it mentioned the Wind tribe instead of the Wind clan. One of the admins, when I commented saying, hate to be that guy, but there's no Wind tribe, it's the Wind clan, and we're matrilineal, not matriarchal. Okay, there's something else I can't remember that was part of the discussion, but that's the thing, is that, you know, you have these, they kind of double down. One lady's like, you need to do your research more. And she's an admin. But she's like kind of getting all hissy on me, right? Probably some crotchety old lady, I don't know. You know, and she's like, and your granny wasn't an Indian princess. And I'm like, to the first thing I said, I actually, you know, pretty well researched, thank you very much. To the second one, I'm like, I never said my granny was an Indian princess. Why would you say such a thing? To which she replies, I didn't mean you specifically, but to anyone who thinks their granny is. It's like, okay, gotta make their little fake trigger. Okay, it's like, I never said it, so why would you tell me that? What makes you think that I think that? Right? I didn't respond to her last comment, but it's like, come on. But then there's the man admin, okay, who we discussed things, and he kind of doubled down like, oh, well, you know, the tribe or clan, it's kind of used interchangeably, and I'm like, you know, at least I didn't really respond to that part directly because he left these really long paragraphs of response. Nice guy, and I respect him, and I told him at one point, I'm like, look, I respect you, man, but I mean, there's still some things that just don't quite add up here. I mean, because he mentions, others mention colonial sources. I'm like, how do you know that your own stuff isn't really tainted by colonial sources as well? You know? And I'm like, look, you know, I'm like the Mikos and the Hiniha, which are the second chief, and like the chief speakers, the warriors, like these were all men. And I'm like, you know, the thing is, like, you can look at Swanton's book and you can see all this stuff, and you can look at the modern tradition in Oklahoma and you can see the same thing, basically. As far as I can tell from my limited exposure to the modern living tradition, okay? But as a people, so here's the thing. The genealogy in question had to do with, and I better, you know, try to wrap this up in like 8 minutes here. Sehoy, who married, was it Marchand, a French Marine. Their daughter was Sehoy Marchand, who married Alexander MacGillivray's father, Lachlan MacGillivray. And so Alexander MacGillivray belonged to the same matrilineage, and then his sister's son was William Weatherford, Red Eagle, okay? Those two men belonged to the Cosati or Coshada people. Now, if you look at if you look at them as a people, there was like 5 or 6 towns made up of the Alabama and the Cosati or Coshada. There's a branch that went to Texas that became the Alabama Coshada tribe of Texas. There's the Coushatta tribe of Louisiana, and then there's the Alabama and the Casardi towns of Oklahoma that became the Alabama Casardi tribal town in 1939. It's interesting because the Alabama, the Casardi, or Coushatta, or Casati, all had enough of the same culture and similarities compared to other tribal towns in the Creek Nation that they pretty much were always almost their own tribe anyway, but they had their own separate villages, and I guess, and so that's kind of how they had their identity. But you look at the Texas group today, and I mean, they finally had the first ever female second chief. They've always had male chiefs and second chiefs up until now. Muskogee Nation of Oklahoma, yeah, a woman could run for office, but there's only ever been one female second chief. I think that was in the 80s or 90s. If my memory serves correct, which it may be incorrect on the exact date. So I apologize for that. But I'm looking at it like, if you look at the way the towns are structured, yeah, it was matrilineal. Oh yeah, and this guy was saying, oh, it's both matriarchal and matrilineal, and kind of goes off with this long paragraph response. I'm just like, anyways, like, you know, he's a nice guy, I respect him. I'm not going to mention my name. I'm not going to mention the exact name of the group before or now, but some of you might be aware of it already. So some of you might have even seen my comments. But, you know, I'm not saying everything was lost in the East. There are some things that have been maintained, but there's also been some developments, if you will. And unfortunately, people have kind of doubled down on these developments as if that's the original way. And the earliest sources about Sehoy would have probably been colonial sources. So if it said Wind tribe, or if it said matriarchal, that's incorrect. Even the Venerable Bede, you look back at his Anglo-Saxon history, and it's like, I think it was called the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. No, I could be wrong, but the Venerable Bede, he does mention in his book that the Picts, which are up in what is now Scotland, they're a matriarchal society, and that's not true. They were ran by kings, but they were matrilineal, not matriarchal, matrilineal. Okay, the same holds true for the Muskogee people. It's been a. I'm not saying women haven't had their influence and power and their gusto, when it comes to dealing with kids and the household and all this other stuff. And I'm not saying there weren't some influential women in the early written history, but I am saying that these women of note were kind of the exception, not the rule. We're almost always hearing about the men, even once Creek Nation became like when it moved west, and there's more writing, there's more like it started to look like a tribal government the way we have it now in a sense. You still had House of Kings and House of Warriors for the nation as a whole, and it gathered in the at the council house. And each tribal town, because they were still tribal towns, they were not relegated to being ceremonial grounds only. They had actual political authority at the time. And each town had its own House of Kings and House of Warriors. And the leading clans for who became chief or second chief varied from town to town. But it's nevertheless, this was men who were running the show. I'm not saying that women didn't have their influence behind the scenes. I'm not saying other tribes didn't have their council of women leaders, but even if the Iroquois had, like the Iroquois Confederacy, I think was run by a council of 12 women, if I'm not mistaken. That's all great and all. That's not the Muskogee people, though. And one of my problems with that conversation I had on that group was that, okay, you're mentioning other tribes, but that's kind of irrelevant because I thought this was a group about Creek people, right? The only other group that might be relevant might be the Yuchi, because they actually joined the Creek Confederacy, and even they had a chiefdom that passed from father to son, irrespective of clan, at least according to Swanton. And a lot of his information is accurate. Some of it might not be totally accurate, but he consulted a lot of people because, personally, I think he had less reason to lie about things because he was trying to preserve what was a dying culture at that time. And today, he's been proven to be mostly correct because among a lot of us today, the culture pretty much is dead. Okay, you have people that are keeping it alive, but by and large, the majority of Muskogee people don't actually have the culture intact. Okay, we don't remember, a lot of us don't remember what clans we belong to. I know. Okay, but I also had to find out. I had to do my detective work, which I think I mentioned in a previous video. And found living relatives in my matrilineal descent that actually, that were able to verify. I was able to verify my clan through them. And other people can do that. Other people have to rely on these written records and say, okay, my great maternal line grandmother, her brother was this guy and he was of this clan. So therefore I must be of that clan as well, because the living tradition died out as far as remembering what clan they belonged to, either because of white man schools or going to the churches more than the ceremonial grounds, things like that. Okay. So a lot has been lost in Oklahoma, but in some respects, a lot's been lost in the East. I noticed that the Eastern bands tend to get more into the historical art. How much of them are reenacting and recreating what was based upon written sources, and how much of it is actually living tradition, I don't know. That's my thing, and I'm not trying to be critical too much, but I'm bringing that up as a point, because in Oklahoma, it's a living tradition. It's dying, but it's a living tradition. And a lot of the Eastern Creeks are getting that from some of us who are going back over there and teaching them stuff. Not myself personally, but others, those who actually grew up in the traditional ways. So I'm kind of, how much of what they know is beholden to what we've taught them, how much of it is what their ancestors actually taught them, and how much of it is what they got from books, I don't know. And I'm not saying books are bad, because we need to learn how to read, and we need to understand, elements of our history that have not been passed on in our living lineage. Because let's be honest, your great grandfather can only tell you so much before he dies. You can't relive your grandfather's life through all of his stories. You have to remember what you can, live your own life, pass on what you can to your grandchildren and great grandchildren, and that's it. That's all you can do. So books are important. Written sources are very great to have. We cannot just say they're all inaccurate. Sometimes we can verify them. Again, Julius Caesar was right about the Celts. Okay, human sacrifice was a thing. Okay, And according to our traditional stories, we took scalps also. Some of us took heads. Okay, us Muskogee people. Okay, so it's not just the French taught us how to be evil or whatever. It's like, no, we were doing this stuff beforehand. Okay, that's how we counted the dead. And you look at the Egyptians, they took hands. They cut off like I think the right hand of whoever they killed, and they put them in a pile. I've seen the historical stone relief artwork of that. So, I mean, cultures throughout the world have had their own ways of counting the dead without having to, carry the bodies and then, whatever, right? You carry a small part of the body becomes the proof that that kill was made, and that's how many of your enemies were actually killed. So, anyways, how do I end this? Because we're already like almost 31 minutes into this. I just want to say that there's, I'm not trying to belittle our ancestors. I'm not trying to make us look bad. I'm not trying to make other bands of Creeks look bad or other Indians of other tribes look bad. I'm just trying to say that we need to be honest about the truth and be honest about history, and not just say, oh no, my ancestors were always noble and perfect and wonderful and angelic and blah, 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 until the white man showed up. Yeah, I'm sorry. That's a load of crap. And we all need to live in reality when it comes to that. Okay. Because no one has a perfect family story. If we were always perfect until the white man showed up, then why did we fall into their ways? Unless we already had some of those ways. I'm serious. I mean, there's some major problems in Indian country when it comes to addiction and when it comes to spousal abuse and apparently date violence and things like that. And it's not just the men doing it either. Okay. There's some pretty volatile women out there. So, but it's, I think, generally coming from the men, probably. But I don't know. It could be coming just as much from the women. You never know. Either way, we got problems we got to fix. So let's fix the problems. Let's be honest about our history and our culture and things like that. And let's try to live a better life and build a better future, because that's what we need for ourselves, is what we need for our kids and for their kids. So let's not sugarcoat things. Let's be totally honest about these sort of things that happened in the past. And that way we can build and fix the problems, and let that be reminders, actually, of what we should not be doing. Think about that. I mean, if the Jews were to say, no, David was our greatest king, he never did anything wrong, and they left out the whole issue with him, banging Bathsheba, who was married to Uriah, and then having Uriah killed so he could marry her when he found out she was pregnant with his kid. Yeah, if the Jews left that out of the record, that would have been pretty bad, because we learned a very important lesson in history from that. And also that the king humbled himself before God afterwards because he realized that he was in the wrong. He knew he was in the wrong, but then the prophet came and told him that. Okay? How often does a king get down on his knees and begs God for forgiveness in front of the people? Okay? Think about that. Okay? Anyways. So yeah, bumps and bruises. Let's tell our history. Let's be honest about it. And look, maybe you have this "I'm woman, hear me roar" type of movement going on, but let's not taint our history or rather revise our history by making it sound like, oh, they were all run by women the entire time, or just as much run by women as by men. No, that's not the case. We got to be honest about history. Who goes out and fights the wars? Almost always the men. Okay. I'm sorry, and I'm not crapping on women. I'm not. Okay, but I'm just want to be honest about history. I want to tell the truth. Okay. As I told them in that group, I come from a long matrilineage of tough, hardy, hard-headed, Muskogee women. So I understand the strength of women. I understand the good and the bad. Okay. Anyways, I'll talk to y'all later. You have a great day, and let me know what you think. Mado.